All right. Welcome back to BeekTalk. This is our third episode. I am happy to get this show on the road, folks. Today we are talking about apiary planning, which I think is a beneficial discussion to new beekeepers or people who've only been keeping bees for a few years. If you're a bit more experienced, I'd love to have some of your feedback in the comments. But today our topic, like I said, is apiary planning. We're going to be talking about the natural ebbs and flows of the number of colonies that you will have in your apiary, as well as some tips and tricks to calculating losses, predicting splits. That way you can allocate resources to support and help your hives grow and thrive. So before we get into the topic today, I want to encourage everyone who's on the live stream now to like and share the live stream. If you know any beekeepers, you can comment their names in the comments directly to make sure that they get this video. Also, if you have any questions or ideas that you want to discuss, drop them in the comments. That way I can see them and we can have a discussion. At the end of the live stream, some of my favorite comments, the people who leave some of my favorite comments will get their hands on a cool BeekTalk sticker that I have here. As you know, I also have some of these other stickers available on my website, blossombuzzbees.buzz or mitefight.buzz. Either of those websites, you can get your hands on these stickers, or you can leave me comments there as well. But like I said, today we're talking about apiary planning. This is something that isn't discussed in a lot of introductory classes. So people who are just starting out with bees usually have a hard time being able to predict the needs of their apiary and find it hard to understand how many colonies they'll have. One thing that I want to talk about, I don't know about how you got your start into beekeeping or any of that, but when people come to me and say, Eric, I'd like to get started with bees, do you have any advice? Always my first tidbit of advice is to start with at least 2 hives. That way you can have a point of comparison, and you also have some resources to share back and forth from the hives. And that way, if one dies, you still have the other hive. It is a bitter discussion, but it is a way of life, is that colonies die over winter. That's what happens. If you're a new beekeeper, it is not unusual to experience 50 to 100% colony losses over winter. And that is not really to say that you're a bad beekeeper or anything like that. Beekeeping is a complex study, it's a complex hobby, and it's just part of the nature. I have been keeping bees for 14 years, and for the first 5 or 6 solid years, I had 50, 60, 100% losses over winter. And it is a bummer, but you do learn a lot from the hives that you lose over winter. If you're taking notes and doing experiments, you gain a lot of knowledge and information from those hives. So losing hives, yes, is a bummer, but it's also just part of beekeeping. So we're going to talk about losing hives today. We're also going to talk about splits a little bit, splits or swarms. So some of the ebbs and flows of beekeeping involve balancing the hives that you lose over winter with the hives that you split in the spring. Split is kind of like the biological birth of a new hive. Split or swarm, there's a couple different words for that function of the hive. But, we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Let me just check my notes here. So like I said, we're going to talk about apiary planning. And I think wintertime is a good time to have this discussion, because if you don't have bees yet, it's definitely good information to have when you're going into it. And if you already have bees, right now is kind of a lull in the season, and it's a good time to learn more about apiculture. Winter is a great time to set goals for your apiary. I'm usually a goal-driven person, and not everybody's like that. But when you're a beekeeper, it's good to set some goals for yourself. That way, it's not just something that you do to fill your time. It's something that's productive and enriching. I don't know, something that gives you value. And apiary planning is a very broad topic that is calculated differently by experience level, operation size, the different approaches you have towards beekeeping. Those are all factors that weigh into how you can plan for your apiary. So in this discussion, apiary planning, I think it would be beneficial to talk about what an apiary is. Apiary is basically a word for a collection of beehives, or where a beekeeper keeps their bees. This is usually a fenced-in area, has stands, a bunch of hives all together in one place. Apiary and aviary are two different things. Apiary is bees, aviary is birds. So you got the birds and bees, sounds the same, but they are different. If you know the Latin name for honeybee, it's Apis mellifera or mellifera. And apis is that first word, the root word. It is the same in apiary, API. And that is basically meaning bee in Latin. So apiary is the bee place, and Apis mellifera is honey-bearing bee. So now that we know what an apiary is, you will not be stumped as I say this word a million times throughout this BeekTalk. So now I want to discuss some of the decisions that are involved. Like I said, all of beekeeping is allocating resources to different hives. So you want to make sure you have the equipment for them. You want to make sure that you have all of these, you have the space, you have the carrying capacity and the environment for your bees. It's discouraging for new beekeepers having to buy bees all the time, and it's actually putting a strain on the industry. It also gets money flowing through the industry, but you have to weigh the options. I am a big fan of sustainable apiaries, where the beekeeper has to buy bees initially, but then they manage their apiary in a way that understands that you're going to lose some hives and you're going to split hives in the spring. And you have to do this balance of making sure you have enough equipment and making sure you don't have too many hives or you don't lose too many hives, so you're able to produce enough honey or produce enough of whatever it is that you're keeping bees for. So it's like I said, it's a very broad topic. So if you have any experience with keeping bees, or if you want to be used as an example a bit later on in this BeekTalk, if you can comment below the number of years of experience you have beekeeping and how many hives you have. I can use that information to help you calculate if you might need to purchase bees with your goals, or if you might need to purchase equipment. So we'll get into that in a little bit longer, but I'd love to have some of your comments. I see some people already commenting here. Brandon actually won the sticker last time around, so I'm hoping you're enjoying that. So basic bare bones beekeeping. You're losing bees over winter. As long as bees have been around, as long as there's been flowering plants, there's been honeybees, and there's been about a 25% loss over winter. That is just the natural attrition of hives in the ecosystem. However, strong hives that are surviving winter in the springtime naturally want to split. They want to divide. So it's kind of like cell division. If you remember biology class, you have one big cell and it sucks up all these nutrients. It gets really big and then it pops into two. That's basically what beehives do. That's how they have birth in a way. That's how they reproduce, is by splitting or swarming. I'm going to talk about these two words a lot through many episodes of BeekTalk, but a split, I should start with a swarm. A swarm is the bees naturally dividing. That's their biology. That's what they want to do. A split is a beekeeper who understands the biology of bees and is using that to our advantage to retain both halves of the original colony. So we're artificially swarming that colony into two and retaining both of those halves. Otherwise, the beekeeper just loses bees. And that's not really a best practice of beekeeping, because that swarm can go live in your neighbor's house or land on your neighbor's car or go fly into a playground somewhere. And that, puts a bad rap on the beekeeping community. So now we're going to move right along. I feel bad for new beekeepers because they don't always have an understanding of how common it is for colonies to collapse over wintertime. This is just the nature of it. And new beekeepers experience unusually high collapse rates. It's not to say that you're a bad beekeeper. None of that. It's none of that. It's just that beekeeping is very complex and there's a lot of nuance to the way that you can do operations, and executing a couple of maneuvers to a hive slightly incorrectly can add up to a greater collapse rate. So if you're a first or second or third year beekeeper, it is not unusual to experience 50 to 100% losses over winter. I've done it for many years until I developed good systems that worked for me. Please don't be discouraged. That's just the way that it is. Once you've been a beekeeper for a few more years, or once you have a good mentor or some good experience, that collapse rate should drop down to about 25 to 50%. Now, this is the range. This is the target audience that I'm going for with BeekTalk. So this is the audience I'm going to address now. You're going to lose somewhere between 25 to 50% of the hives you go into winter with. And I'm going to talk about the magic of 3 hives a little bit later. But 3 hives is the sweet spot. If you go into winter with 3 hives, you're going to have 1 to 2 of them survive. That 1 or 2 that survive are naturally going to want to split in the spring. So if you have 1 hive make it through, you're going to have 2 hives once the honey flow starts, because you're going to take that 1 and split it into 2. However, if you have 2 of those hives, 2 of the original 3 surviving winter, you're going to split those and now have 4 hives. So this is where a bit of a dilemma comes in. And wintertime is when you want to be calculating these resources. If you have 2 hives survive winter, that's 4 hives in the spring that you need to have equipment, you need to have supers, lids, frames, hive stand space for. Otherwise, you're going to have homeless bees, or you're going to have bees that swarm and leave your apiary, and that's a lost opportunity for the beekeeper. So if you would like to be used as an example, I'd recommend that you comment in the comments here, and I can do a rundown of some of the numbers. But definitely when you're planning your goals for the apiary, now is the time that you want to be sitting out and planning a lot of this stuff, because if you don't consider these factors now in the winter, it'll be far too late in the springtime. I've already messed up numbers or neglected to do some calculations and found myself having to frantically purchase and paint and build equipment, in the springtime when the bees are ready to swarm or have already swarmed, and I simply don't have the equipment to capture and retain these bees. And that's a bummer, because your hives die, like I said, and you want to retain as much of that bee manpower as you can. That way you can get your honey or whatever you're keeping bees for. Let me see where I should jump back into now. Yeah, so like I said, splits and swarms are part of the biology of bees, and a lot of factors go into calculating where to do your splits and how to operate your apiary. So I'm going to use my apiary as an example, because for the rest of the Beek Talks and everything else, I'm going to be using my apiary as the main example. I run 10 frame Langstroth equipment, and I try and do a single deep as the brood chamber. So almost all of my hives that are going into winter, if they're not in nuke boxes like this, they are in a single deep 10 frame equipment. So let's say I have 10 hives. I actually haven't even calculated how many hives are going into winter yet, but let's say I have 10 hives. I'm figuring I'm going to lose at least 2 to maybe 5 of those hives dead in the spring. Not because of me, but just because of the way that bees are, right? I only have equipment for 10 hives because that's what I put into winter. If 5 of those hives survive, I make splits and I fill up all of my 10 hives worth of equipment. I'm okay. But let's say 8 hives survive, and now I make those splits and I wind up with 16 hives. That means I need to purchase equipment for 6 more hives, or I have to find beekeepers in my area who would love to have my swarms, my splits. It's very common, and I encourage you, if you're in a position where you can give bees to a new beekeeper or to a less experienced beekeeper, I encourage you to do that, because it's a great gift to the community and it's a great opportunity for people to learn. So if you're able to give bees to someone, that means you're successful and you get to spread the joy of beekeeping to someone else. So I encourage you to do that. But if you're not as giving, you need to purchase equipment, because you have to house 6 more hives. And this is where the planning comes in. If you know, man, it takes me an hour to do a hive, I don't want to be spending 16 hours a week or a month or whatever your schedule is on bees, maybe you don't split hives, or maybe you run larger colonies simply for the ease of operation. This is where the discussion gets a little harder and less theoretical, more directly to you. Depends on how you run your apiary. But when I do splits, now I'm going to have many talks about how to do splits, but since I run single deeps 10 frame equipment, this is how I do splits. Early in the season, just before the main nectar crop in the spring comes out, here in Pennsylvania, that's dandelions. So just like a week before I think the dandelions are going to be in full swing, what I'll do is I'll go into the hive, find the queen, take the queen and say 4 frames of brood with the bees on them. I take those frames and the queen and move them to a new hive. I leave the rest of the bees and the rest of the brood in the existing location. And then what I can do is wait a month to allow them to make a new queen, which works about 75% of the time. Hi, Mandy. Or you can purchase a queen from a bee breeder, or a cell or a virgin queen or something like that. You can purchase genetics to put into that hive and allow that hive a little bit less time to get back on its feet. If you do a walk-away method where you just let them make their own queen, you should have a new queen within a month. And again, you're going to have to check back up to make sure that they were successful. 25% of the time, it's not successful. And that's just a number that you have to keep in mind. The queen and the 4 frames of brood that you move to another location, after about 3 weeks, the queen has laid a lot of eggs and those eggs have had time to hatch. That hive should be ready to go and start producing tons of brood, tons of nectar, bringing in a lot of resources. That's your power hive. So the trick here is that the original queen is moved to a reduced colony of only a few frames of brood and is made small. This operation tricks the queen into thinking that she already split, she already swarmed. The beekeeper manipulated the hive into thinking that way, but that's what we did. And that usually keeps the queen grounded for that year, or at least until she wants more space or has ample resources. So that gets into a discussion about different management practices. But that was my example for a single deep of 10 frame equipment. If my apiary runs double deeps, I might be able to take the original queen, move it, and then make two walkaway splits from the existing brood. Because out of 20 frames, you move 4 of them. Now you have 16 frames, which would make 2 nice splits. So if you run 10 hives going into winter in double deeps, you might be able to recoup your losses over winter and wind up with double the amount of hives that you went into winter with in the spring. Now, that's not always the case, but it's definitely something you should consider as the beekeeper. You want to make sure that you are preparing to have the frames, the woodenware, to meet the goals of your apiary. If you only want 10 hives, you better find some friends to give those bees to. Otherwise, they're going to be swarming and leaving you. And, that's not a great thing for the beekeeping community. On the flip side, if you're a new beekeeper and you're going into winter with 2 hives, I would expect to lose 1 or maybe both of those hives. So what I would do is I would place an order and try and find local nukes, nucleus colonies. They come in boxes like this, usually 5 frames. I am a nuke producer here in northeastern Pennsylvania. So if you're in my area, you can purchase nukes at blossombuzzbees.buzz. If you're not from my area or wherever you are in the country, there are people like me who are raising bees in your area. And it's really important to get bees from where you live. Not only is it better for the health of your bees, but it's also healthier for the genetics in the area. Moving and shipping bees all across the country weakens the genetics or the strength of bees in ecosystems. And every ecosystem is different. It's different for me than it is for people who live 20 minutes away at a higher elevation. There's a lot of factors. And I definitely encourage nukes over packages. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. If you only have 2 hives going into winter, it's possible you can lose both of those hives. So what I would do as a new beekeeper is place an order for 1 or 2 nukes in January or February. And then by the time March or April rolls around, you'll know if your hive survived winter. If you lost both hives, great. You place that order, no problem. If you didn't lose any hives, miraculously, you can get lucky. You can be a great beekeeper and not know it. There's a lot of factors, but then you have that option to cancel the order. It's not great to do that to small businesses, but believe me, they'll understand. And it proves that you're a better beekeeper than you'd think if you have to cancel orders. However, you do not want to be the beekeeper who calls a bee distributor in May and says, I did not plan, I didn't think about my bees all winter long, I lost all my hives, do you have any nukes for me? Because then you're going to pay a premium price for probably a weaker nuke than you would if you got one in the spring. And you'll be set even farther behind than you would be if you placed an order early. So my recommendation to people who have less than 2 colonies is to pretty much always place an order in the spring and then cancel it if you are doing better than you expected. Usually beekeepers won't make splits or anything until their climate can allow for it. So if you place an order in January and cancel it by March, that beekeeper didn't even blink an eye. So that's one of those things to consider. Now, before I end this Beek Talk, and you're more than welcome to place some comments. If you have any experience, if you want to talk about your collapse rate over winter or anything like that, you can leave me a comment. Or if there's a Beek Talk idea that you want to have discussed in a future episode, you can leave that in the comments as well. Even after the live stream has ended, I love to see this feedback. Anyway, I want to talk about the power of 3s. This is the sweet spot. A lot of beekeepers who are considered backyard beekeepers or garden beekeepers, they only want 1 or 2 hives. And I understand that. Beekeeping, it takes time, it takes practice, it takes energy, and it's not a cheap hobby. But 3 is the sweet spot. 1 hive, you're pretty much setting yourself up for failure. 2 hives is a great start. However, you'll only really be with 2 hives if you lose both of your hives, or if pretty much if you have 2 hives, you're going to be in a constant cycle of buying bees or letting them swarm without you catching them. So my recommendation to people who don't want a lot of hives is to plan to keep 2 hives and have the equipment for a 3rd. This way, you'll purchase 2 hives, keep them all year, plan to lose both or one of them. But if you don't lose any of them, you can make splits to fill up that 3rd set of equipment in the following year. And this is a really nice place to be. If you are studying as a beekeeper and practicing and experimenting, you can balance having 2 hives with a 3rd's worth of equipment. And this is a good cycle to be in. Many people I've talked to who have been beekeepers for a long time simply don't have equipment for a 4th hive. And this leaves them to give away bees or to just balance the ebbs and flows of their apiary with those 3 hives worth of equipment. So I implore you to think about that. My recommendation for someone who has not gotten bees yet, but is thinking about it, is your first year, take a lot of classes. I have classes scheduled in January on blossombuzzbees.buzz. They're all aimed towards beginners. So if you have a family member who is thinking about getting bees, sign them up for my classes, because it'll definitely get their feet wet and it'll give them enough information to start purchasing equipment. So your first year, you're learning, you're spending money on classes, and I recommend that you set up your apiary with your electric fence and all that. Those are discussions that I'll get to in another BeekTalk. But you can also start purchasing equipment. This is an expensive investment, but if you plan it over a couple years, it's actually not too expensive of a hobby. Then in your second year, I recommend that you buy your bees. So you already have the education, you already have the equipment from your first year. The second year, you buy bees and the medications and mite treatments needed for your apiary. Excuse me. Then in your third year, you purchase another set of equipment for that third hive, and possibly, depending on how you fared over winter, buying more bees. This 3 years into beekeeping is a good way to get your feet wet, for you to handle the bees as they're coming. A lot of people who have the money to dump on a hobby, they will jump right in and they'll buy 5 hives, they'll buy 10 hives, and realize they didn't purchase enough equipment or the right equipment, and kind of have to backpedal on the whole experience. So my recommendation is to grow into the number of hives that you would ideally like to have, and just be prepared that it might take a few years to get there. But in growing with your apiary, you grow as a beekeeper, and that will do you really well. It's hard to explain to a new beekeeper, but I'm sure some of the more experienced beaks will surely understand what I mean. So I have a comment from Mandy, and she says, can you introduce the nuke to a hive versus canceling? That is an option. It's a little complicated because you have queens to deal with. There's only ever 1 queen per colony. I say this with an asterisk because there's some rare, unique situations where there's multiple queens in a colony. But that's a weird discussion. I actually have a beekeeper friend who would be great to have as a guest on the show to talk about double queen hives. But yeah, Mandy's asking if you can, instead of canceling your nuke, merge it with another hive that you have in your apiary. And here's what I recommend with that. If you have 1 hive that survived winter and you purchase a nuke, what I would do is split the original hive like I talked about earlier, or using any other method. But instead of allowing the queenless portion of the queenless split to make their own queen, I would introduce that brood to the nuke and make like a power nuke, make a really strong nuke, lots of bees, lots of brood, and that queen that came with the nuke when you purchased it, that's going to be a honey producing hive. So I hope that answers your question. It is possible to do. It is a little complex. It involves some timing around when, you have to leave the queenless split queenless for a few days, and then go in and remove their cells, their queen cells, their attempt at making a queen, and then they will happily accept the queen from the nuke without problem. If you do it, if you do the split and introduce that split, the queenless split to the nuke in the same day, there's going to be some infighting. And you don't really want that, especially in the spring when, man, every moment counts. So, Mandy, I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Now, let me see if there's any other wrap-ups that I want to consider. I talked about the power of threes. 3 hives is the place to be if you're trying to keep a small apiary. Like I said, I have classes coming up in January on Blossom Buzz Bees. So if you want to take any of those classes, Mandy, who is on this live stream, has actually taken some of my classes before. She's going into her 2nd year and she's adding a 2nd hive. So that's great. I'm very excited for you, Mandy. I wish you the best of luck this year, and I hope that hive makes it through, because woo, then you can be making some splits, and that's where the fun in beekeeping comes in. Anyway, I am glad that you joined me on this Beek Talk. This is my 3rd episode. If you have any ideas for another Beek Talk that you'd like to see, any topics that you don't really understand that you'd like to go into further depth, you can drop them in the comments, or you can send me an email on either of my websites that I mentioned. Otherwise, I will see you again next Tuesday at 4 o'clock when we have another Beek Talk. Thank you.